Americans are horribly misinformed about who has money. It's a completely distorted view that most Americans have about how wealth is distributed in this country. I'm going to put up a chart in a second, Natan, about a paper, written about a paper called Building a Better America, One Wealth Quintile at a Time by Dan Ariely and Michael Norton. Let's put that chart up right now, Lewis. Let me explain this chart to you here.
I don't think Lewis is in control.
Okay. This shows real versus imagined wealth distribution in the U.S., splitting it up into the top, second, middle, fourth, and bottom 20%. Okay, the top row is the actual distribution of wealth. And if you look, the blue is the top 20% of wealth, okay? Or rather, the top 20% of the population. Everything okay, Lewis?
Yeah. My headphones hit my mic. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
People are really worked up about that announcement, I have to say. Can we focus on this chart, guys?
All right, I'm good.
Okay. The top 20% of the population controls, as you can see in the top line, 85% of the wealth in this country. That's the reality. The next 20% controls about 10% of the wealth. The middle, fourth, and bottom 20%, in other words, the lower 60% of the country, has only a tiny sliver, about 4 or 5% of the entire wealth. Now, here's what's fascinating. If you ask people, how do you think wealth is distributed in this country? People think we have a far more equal distribution of wealth. So, for example, if you look, and the numbers are almost identical, if you look amongst people making under $50,000 a year, between $50,000 and $100,000 a year, over $100,000 a year, they all think that the top 20% has about 60% of the wealth instead of 85%. And interestingly enough, most people believe that that second 20%, which in reality has only about 8 or 9% of the country's wealth, actually holds about 20 or 22% of this country's wealth. That's interesting. Now let's also look at what they think would be ideal, okay? If you ask people what would be ideal for wealth distribution, it's pretty close among people who make under $50,000, between $50,000 and $100,000, and over $100,000. Roughly, people believe that the top 20% of the population should have somewhere between 30 and 40% of this country's wealth. Bush voters think that number should be slightly higher than Kerry voters, not surprising. Interestingly enough, men believe that number should be slightly higher than women believe. Women think that wealth distribution should be slightly more even across the population. So what can we determine from this, Lewis? We can determine a number of things. Specifically, it's really easy to see how the misperception about wealth distribution affects politics, right? Because when we hear about people saying, we like the Bush tax cuts for people making more than $250,000 a year, it's perfectly fair to have that position, but have that position based on an understanding of reality, not based on an understanding where you think that wealth is significantly more evenly distributed than it actually is.
Right. But that's just one of the many topics that voters are misinformed on. I would say taxes, though, is probably in the top 3.
Okay.
So we already knew that, right?
Yeah. I guess we knew that, but this really puts some numbers to it. I mean, Natan, what do you find most interesting about this? The disparity between the reality and what people believe is the reality, or the disparity between what people believe is the reality and what they believe would be ideal?
Well, I think that one of the reasons why people think it would be ideal for the top 20% to have, 30 to 40% of the wealth,
right,
is because people have a distorted view of how wealthy they're going to be in the next 10 to 20 years.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So the effect of the American dream.
Right.
If people were more realistic in thinking about will they ever be in the top 20%, they might not even think the top 20% should own 30% of the wealth, is kind of what you're getting at.
I think that's a huge part of it, yeah.
I think when the average person is considering their vote based on a tax proposal, I don't think they're actively thinking about wealth distribution across the whole country. I think they're thinking.
They may not be thinking about it.
They're thinking about themselves.
Yeah, they may not be thinking about it this granularly, but they're thinking about their understanding of what it is definitely comes into play. I think there's no question.
And I wouldn't say that the numbers are drastically different here between the reality of wealth distribution and people's perception of
I
wealth
completely
distribution.
disagree with you. I completely disagree with you.
It's a significant difference, but I don't think it's a huge difference.
Okay, I disagree. If we look at the numbers, not only is the percentage owned by the top 20% significantly different, but the size of the second 20% in reality is less than half that of what people perceive it to be. I think that's huge because it's that second tier.
As income goes, as the income goes down, the numbers get higher.
All right, we're way behind. We got to take a break. Let's come back and talk to Alona Minkowski from RT's The Alona Show and plenty more stories to get to. Stay tuned.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.